Hey everyone, it's Angela from Cake Angel. Today I'm going to show you how to make my very favourite dairy-free jam donuts, just like the kind you'd buy at a fair. And for this we're going to be using a variety of different ingredients, and I'm going to go through these as we add them into our mixing bowl today. And let's get going. Okay, to start with we're going to melt 4 tablespoons of butter. For this I'm using a plant-based butter, and I've just melted it for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to set that to one side. Next thing we're going to do is warm up some milk. For this I'm using a plant-based almond milk, and you want to heat it up to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. We're just going to wait for that to go up to the right temperature. There we go, that's close enough, so that's great. And that's going to actually help to activate the yeast once we put everything together. Okay, so let's start adding everything into the mixing bowl. We're going to start with 1 cup of flour. And this is all-purpose flour. I'm going to pop the rest aside for now. To that we're going to add a 1/4 cup of sugar. We're also going to use some yeast, and this is instant yeast. I'm going to use 2 1/4 teaspoons. And then we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Okay, great, everything's ready in our mixing bowl. I'm using a stand mixer for this, as this will actually do the kneading for us a little bit later. The first thing we need to do now is to whisk these 4 ingredients together just until they're combined. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and add our wet ingredients, and as I mentioned earlier, this will be the ones that will actually help to activate the yeast. So this is our warm milk. Again, we heated that up to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's 2/3 cup of milk. Next we're going to add 3 tablespoons of melted butter. I'm using a plant-based butter for this, so this is a dairy-free recipe. Next we're adding 2 egg yolks, and I'm just going to scoop out the last bits of those. And then our last ingredient, I'm going to add a teaspoon of vanilla bean paste. Now you could use vanilla extract if you don't have the paste. I just prefer the paste because I like all those little bits of the vanilla bean. It adds a little bit of extra dimension to the flavour of the donut. Okay, and make sure we scrape all of that off. And then we're going to go ahead and whisk it all together again. And this doesn't take very long to combine, but you do want to make sure everything is fully incorporated before we set it aside to raise. Let's take a look. And before we let it sit, we're just going to scrape everything off of the whisk attachment. And then I'm going to give it a quick stir with my spatula, just to make sure we haven't missed anything. But you can see that looks great. That's exactly the consistency that we want at this stage. And then all we need to do now is cover it and let it rest at room temperature for about 10 minutes until some bubbles start to form on the surface. Now here's a top tip for you. I'm going to use a shower cap for this. I buy shower caps just for the reason of using to cover my icings and to cover doughs when I'm making things like this, and they're perfect because you can reuse them as well. So let's just let that sit for 10 minutes, and while it's doing that, I'm just going to clean everything else away and get ready for the next stage. Okay, our 10 minutes is up. You can see a little bit of condensation on the shower cap, and you can see some nice bubbles have formed on the top of our mixture as well. So that's great. That means our yeast has done everything it's meant to do. Now we can carry on with the recipe, and we're going to add the rest of the flour. So this is an additional 1.5 cups of flour that we're adding in. And I tend not to do all of this in one go because I'd actually prefer just to make sure, depending on the humidity in your kitchen, you may not need all of the flour at this stage. So let's get this bit mixed up for now. I'm using the dough hook for this to do the kneading for us. If you don't have a stand mixer, you could obviously do this by hand as well. I like to use a stand mixer. I find it's just a lot easier for me. Now it's time to add a little bit more flour. And the same process again, we're just going to get it to knead up for a little while. And then we'll check it and see whether we need to add any more. Generally, the rule of thumb when you're doing this is as soon as all of the mixture stops sticking to the side of the bowl and it comes away cleanly when it's kneading, that usually means that your mix is ready and you don't need any more flour. But it's always worth checking it. It can still sometimes be a little bit sticky when you do it in the stand mixer. Obviously, if you're doing this by hand, you'll get a much better feel for your dough. But this is just to show that you can do this in a stand mixer as well. So I'm just having a feel to see how sticky it is. It's not too bad, a little bit of stickiness left there. So we will need the rest of the flour for this. So to recap, in total we've added 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour to our mix. And that was the cup to start with and a cup and a half after it had risen for 10 minutes. So let's just let that knead for a little bit longer. In total you need to knead it for about 5 minutes. Another top tip for you as well, if you have an oven that has a proofing setting, then you want to go ahead and turn that on at this stage just so it can warm up to temperature, and you'd want to be doing that at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, no warmer, because it will actually start to raise the dough too quickly. If you don't have an oven with that setting, you can always let your dough rise at room temperature, but it will take a lot longer. But we'll talk about that more once the dough is ready. So you can see it's coming away cleanly from the bowl now, so I'm just going to have a quick check of it. And it doesn't really feel sticky now, so it's the right consistency for us. I'm just going to pull everything off the dough hook and then give it a quick mix with my hand just to make sure it picks up all those extra bits at the bottom of the bowl that the dough hook tends to miss. So don't forget to let me know in the comments below as well whether you've tried these type of donuts before. They're really great with strawberry jam, blueberry, whatever flavour of preserve that you like. And a nice change from a ring donut as well. So you can see we've hardly had to do anything by hand for this, which is great. The dough feels really good. And I'm just going to give it another minute, just to make sure everything is nice and combined for us. And you want to make sure you don't skip this step and make it shorter, because it's really important to make sure that we're kneading lots of air into our dough so that it'll be nice and light when we actually bake the donuts. It also helps to develop the gluten as well, so it's a really important stage. And whilst I say we're using the stand mixer to make it easier, it's still really important to knead it for those 5 minutes. So you can see how that dough is rolling around really nicely and freely in the mixing bowl now, which means that we are ready to start working with it. And you can see it has a nice stretch to it, and it's not sticky anymore either, so it's perfect and ready to go. Okay, so this looks great. The next thing we're going to do is cover it up again, and then I'm going to use the proof-in setting on my oven, and we're going to let it rise at 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes. If you're doing this at room temperature, you want to leave it for about an hour and a half or until it doubles in size. The next thing I'm going to do is line a baking sheet with some parchment paper. And this is just getting everything ready so that we can actually cut the shapes for the donuts, and then they'll go back in the oven to rise again. And you don't need anything on your pan to attach the baking paper. And to make it easier, I'm also going to use parchment paper on my counter to roll out the dough. I find this helps, first from not having the dough stick to my counter, and second, it won't stick to the rolling pin either. It does also mean that you're not having to put any flour down on your surface whilst you're rolling the dough. So you're not going to dry it out anymore either. Okay, so there's our dough. It has risen quite a bit, which is great. You can see it just looks a little puffier now. And the bowl will be a little bit warm, but it's not too warm to touch, so you don't need to worry about burning yourself if you've done this in the oven. And again, make sure if you're doing that at room temperature, you need to make sure it's doubled in size before you move on to this stage. So I'm just going to pop the dough on my parchment paper. And it should have that distinct yeasty smell to it now as well. Just going to give it a little bit of a knead by hand. And then I'm going to pop the second piece of parchment paper on top of it so that we're ready to roll. Now you'll see I'm also using some guide sticks here. These are paint sticks from the hardware store. They've never been used for anything else. They're always just used for rolling my dough. And I'm going to use my large rolling pin and roll them out. The paint sticks will help keep the same depth throughout the dough, and it's about a ½ inch thick that we're going for with this. It's a nice cheap alternative to having to buy guide rings for your rolling pin. And just make sure all the time when you're rolling you have a nice even pressure on your rolling pin. You're using those sticks as your guide of where you need to stop rolling. So as soon as the rolling pin won't go any further, you'll feel that resistance against the sticks. So now we're ready to actually cut out our donuts, and I'm using a 2.5 inch cutter for this. You could do bigger ones if you wanted much bigger ones, and obviously smaller ones too if you wanted bite-sized ones, but I think 2.5 inches is about the right size for this type of donut. And when you give it a press, I like to just turn it around a little bit as well. That helps keep a nice even shape. Make sure it cuts it really well too. And in total you should get at least 12 out of this mix. It will of course depend on how thick you roll your dough, but if you do it to about the ½ inch thick, you should get at least 12. And just make sure you keep a little bit of a gap between each of them on the baking tray as well. They won't expand too much, they'll rise more than expand, but still leave a little bit of a gap so the air can circulate around them nicely in the oven. Okay, that's 6 done. Let's carry on and do the rest. Okay, so we're just going to have to knead up the rest of the dough to get the remainder out of there. And of course, if you can get more than 12, you can just go right ahead and add extra ones onto another baking tray as well. We'll probably get a few extra out of this one. And then you want to use the same process, so using those sticks as your guide, pop your parchment paper on top, and then use your rolling pin to roll an even depth. You can see my parchment paper has creased up a little bit there, but it's not to worry. We're just going to straighten it out and then carry on rolling. Okay, so we need 2 more for this baking tray. So let's get those cut. And we still have a little bit of dough left, so I will go ahead and knead that up and then keep going until we run out. So we're just about going to fit one more after I cut this one. So we're going to end up with 15 in total, which is great. These last 3 are going to be probably not as perfect in shape as the others, but that's okay, they'll still taste just as good. So let's get this last one rolled out. I'm not going to bother cutting that one because it's not too dissimilar in size. Okay, so there's our donuts ready. They will need to rise again. So for these, I'm going to cover them with a tea towel. I'm going to pop them back in the oven for 20 minutes at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you're doing this at room temperature, you want to leave it for about 45 minutes until they've puffed up slightly. So let's have a look. They've been in the oven for 20 minutes. So you can see they've risen slightly, but they are going to rise a lot more in the oven when we bake them. So now our oven has been preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to bake them for about 10 minutes until they're slightly golden on top. And whilst they're finishing off in the oven, now we're going to go ahead, we're going to set up our piping bag ready to fill them. For this, I'm using some homemade strawberry jam. I'm using a Bismarck tip, which is a great tip for filling desserts, and I'm also using a tipless piping bag. So I'm going to start by getting my bag set up. I'm going to pop the tip inside. I'm going to trim a little bit off of the end so that some of the tip will actually come through the bag. And you'll notice when I put it in the mason jar to fill it, I'm going to twist the bag slightly and keep the tip upright, as the jam has a tendency to run out of it otherwise. And let's go ahead and get that bag filled. I'm not going to fill it too much, we don't actually need a lot of jam for these. Okay, that's enough jam. We don't need too much for these donuts. It's just a little bit of a filling for each of them. So I'm going to pull my bag up, push it down carefully. I don't want to push it too far because I don't want the jam to come out yet. And then we're going to use a bag tie just to secure the other end of the bag. Next thing we're going to do is get everything else set up so that we can start to coat our donuts as soon as they come out of the oven. Just going to give that last tablespoon of melted butter a stir. And then I've also got a bowl of sugar. I have about a half a cup of sugar here. And let's go ahead and get those donuts out of the oven. Okay, you can see they've puffed up really, really nicely. They have a nice golden colour to them as well, which is perfect. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to brush all of them with the melted butter. Now they have just come out of the oven, so bear that in mind, they're going to be hot. but you don't actually need to hold them for too long, just to turn them around so you can get a nice coating of butter on them. And the reason we're doing this is so that the sugar will stick to them as well and just give them that really nice coating. Now, if you didn't want to fill your donuts, you could obviously just coat them in sugar and then serve them straight away. They are really nice when they're still warm as well. But they will cool down fairly quickly once they are out of the oven. And let's go ahead and roll them in the sugar now to coat them. This is the fun bit, but it's also pretty messy too. So you might want to grab a fork for this, or a spoon, or you can just use your hands, it doesn't really matter. And then you just want to pop them in the sugar and roll them around until they get a nice even coating. A nice variation for this as well, if you pop a little bit of cinnamon in your sugar, you can give them a nice cinnamon sugar coating too. You could also dip them in melted chocolate if you like that. You could pipe some vanilla icing on them, put some sprinkles on them as well. Really anything goes with donuts at all. But I really like this style where you fill them with jam. It very much reminds me of when I was a child and used to go to fairs. So you want to work fairly quickly as well when you're doing this. You just don't want that butter to start to dry off, otherwise the sugar won't stick to it. If you find that that does happen though, because you're taking your time, you could always just brush a little bit more butter on them. And don't they look great with sugar on? I think it really gives them a nice look as well. And there we go, let's have a close-up look. That one looks great. Next thing we're going to do is fill them with jam, so I'm just going to clear everything else away. There's a few different ways that you can do this. You can either use a knife to cut a slit in the donut, or if you're using this particular tip, the Bismarck tip, you can just go right ahead and plunge that into the donuts. Because they're still warm, it will actually let you do that. And then you just pipe straight inside. And you'll always get that little bit of jam that forms on the outside, but if you leave them upright, gravity will actually help to keep everything in place. And it also is great because it gives people a little sneak peek of what's inside too. As you're squeezing this, you will actually feel resistance against the bag when the inside of the donut is full enough. I'm just going to wipe my hands. So it's quite a messy job, as I said. You will get lots of sugar and jam on you when you're doing this, but it's all part of the fun when you make donuts. Okay, let's carry on to get the next one done. So again, I'm just plunging it straight into the middle of the donut. I'm squeezing and then I pull out. And when you are doing this as well, I would recommend that you use a smooth jam. You don't want one that's got too much actual bits of fruit in it, as you'll find that this tip will actually start to clog up. But as long as you get a little bit of jam in each one, it's still nice. Okay, we've just got our last couple to finish. And I can see my tip is clogging up a little bit again. Oh, there we go. We've got a piece of fruit stuck. I'm just going to pull that out. And then our last one. So it's quite a long process to make this kind of donut, but you do have lots of time in between whilst the dough is actually rising, which gives you time to do other things and get your filling made up if you want to make one yourself. And there we go, all stacked up nicely, our dozen jam donuts. Let's take a look inside of one and see what they look like. So you see we've got that nice sugar coating on the outside, a little bit of jam on the inside too. Not too much because my tip was clogging up, but you can see that consistency inside is really nice and fluffy and airy. And I'll just have a little sneaky piece as well. It tastes so good. Okay, so I hope you really enjoyed this bake along. Don't forget to let me know in the comments if you try these or even if you've tried them before. They're really, really popular and taste so, so good. I hope you'll try them, and don't forget to like this video. Also subscribe to my channel so you can get notifications of our next bake along videos too. Let's have a look at another one for one last time. Nice airy consistency and a little bit of jam inside. The perfect jam donut. Thanks for watching.